Hey guys, tonight we wander back through the corridors of a heart that once beat for everyone, only to find it slowly learning the quiet necessity of solitude. Imagine you're standing in a great, candlelit library where the ink on the parchment is still wet, but the people who wrote the words have long since vanished into the mist of history. You feel the warmth of 1,000 old fires, yet there is a cool breeze blowing through the cracks of the window pane, whispering that some things are meant to be let go. It is a heavy realization, but you probably won't survive this emotional journey without feeling a little more peaceful by the end. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Before we begin our trek through time, please leave a comment with your location and your local time so we can know where in this vast world you are listening from. You sit there, wrapped in a heavy wool cloak, watching the embers of a dying fire crackle softly in the hearth. The room is filled with the scent of old parchment, dried lavender, and the faint, lingering aroma of wood smoke that has traveled through centuries to reach your senses. You think about how you used to carry the weight of every person you ever met, holding their joys and their sorrows as if they were your own precious heirlooms. It was a heavy burden, an ancient duty passed down through generations. But tonight, the silence feels more important than the noise of companionship. In the olden days, when the world was vast and the roads were long, love was often tied to the survival of isn'is, a binding force that kept tribes together under the watchful gaze of the moon. You might have felt that to love everyone was the only way to remain anchored in a shifting sea of faces. But there is a certain weariness that comes with being an emotional harbor for every passing ship. The history of your own heart is written in the same ink as the chronicles of old kings, filled with grand passions and the quiet, slow fading of those very same fires. You are learning that to love everyone so fiercely is to risk losing yourself in the vastness of their needs. As you stare into the dancing flames, you realize that your heart was once a wide-open gate, welcoming every traveler who walked through the dusty paths of your life. There were no locks on the gates, no guards at the perimeter, and no boundaries to define where the world ended and where your soul began. You thought that such openness was a virtue, a way to honor the living history of human connection. But even the most generous gates can become worn by the constant wind. The rust of time begins to settle on the hinges, making the movement heavier, slower, certainly more deliberate than it once was. Think of the great libraries of Alexandria or the sprawling gardens of ancient empires, where many walked but few truly stayed. You have been like those gardens, blooming wildly for every passerby, offering your fragrance and your shade without a thought for the gardener's exhaustion. But history teaches us that even the most fertile soil needs to lie fallow sometimes, to rest beneath the snow so that it may find its own strength again. To stop loving everyone is not necessarily to become cold. It is to prepare the ground for a different kind of growth, one that is more sustainable and less prone to the whims of the weather. You can almost hear the footsteps of the ancestors in the hallways of your mind, their voices a low hum of advice about loyalty, devotion, and the bonds of blood. They tell stories of grand wars fought for love and great peace brokered by it. Yet they rarely speak of the quiet fatigue that comes from being too much of a witness to everyone else's drama. You are walking a path that is uniquely yours, even as you tread on the well-worn stones of human experience. The history of your life is not just about who you loved, but also about how you learned to hold them within yourself without losing your own breath. The concept of an everyone is a vast, sprawling empire that no single person was ever meant to govern or sustain. In the olden times, people lived in small circles, where every hand held was a necessary lifeline, but now the world feels much larger and more overwhelming. You are realizing that when you try to hold the whole world in your arms, your fingers often slip, and the warmth escapes through the gaps. It is a lonely thought to contemplate, yet their underscore is a profound truth in the realization that some people were meant to be passing travelers rather than permanent residents of your soul. The stars above have watched civilizations rise and fall, and they have seen how the passions of men burn bright before cooling into the quiet dark of history. You are much like those celestial bodies, burning with a fierce light for so many, only to realize that the vast spaces between us are what allow the light to truly be seen. If you were always close to everyone, there would be no contrast, no depth, and no stillness to define your own brilliance. The history of the universe is a story of expansion and contraction, of gathering and letting go, and you are simply following the cosmic rhythm. You might feel as though the cooling of your affections is a failure, a crack in the ancient masonry of your character, but it is actually the settling of the house. When an old building settles, it creaks and groans. It shifts its weight to find a more stable footing on the earth. Your heart is doing the same, finding a new equilibrium that allows you to stand firm without being crushed by the weight of external expectations. It is not an end, but a structural necessity, a way to ensure that the foundation remains solid for the long years ahead. The stories written in the stars were never meant to be read all at once. They must be studied one constellation at a time, slowly and with great care. Similarly, your relationships cannot be everything at once, or you will become lost in the complexity of the maps. By narrowing your gaze, you are not losing sight of the world, but rather focusing your vision so that you can see the true essence of what remains. It is an act of historical preservation, saving the most precious parts of yourself for the moments when they truly matter. Every great empire eventually faced its twilight, a time when the borders were drawn more tightly and the bustling streets became quiet lanes. This transition was not a loss of glory, but a refinement of purpose, as the focus shifted from conquest to the preservation of culture. You are entering your own twilight, where the grand expansion of your affections is giving way to a more inward-focused stewardship of your spirit. There is no shame in this contraction. There is only the peace of knowing that you have done enough for now. Imagine the ancient philosophers sitting in their groves, debating the nature of virtue and the soul, often wondering if it was better to be loved by many or understood by a few. They knew that the pursuit of universal affection can lead to a scattered spirit, leaving one too thin to truly inhabit their own existence. You are beginning to understand their ancient wisdom through your own lived experience, feeling the texture of their logic in the marrow of your bones. To love everyone is a grand ambition, but to know when to let them go is a profound achievement. The history of human connection is filled with the names of lovers who are now nothing more than dust and memory, yet their impact remains etched into the stones of time. You are learning that you can carry the essence of a person without needing to hold their hand every single day. The fading of the intensity does not mean the disappearance of the importance. It merely means the relationship has transitioned from a roaring fire to a steady, glowing ember. This is the natural progression of all things that have a beginning and an end. There is a certain dignity in the way a sunset fades into the evening, a gradual surrender of light that prepares the world for the rest of the night. You are not losing your warmth. You are simply preparing for a different kind of light to take over the soft, internal glow of self-sufficiency. The people who once occupied every thought are now becoming part of the landscape of your past, beautiful but distant as the far-off mountains. They are the scenery through which you walk, providing context to your journey without demanding that you stop and dwell upon them perpetually. As you settle deeper into your thoughts, consider how much energy it takes to be a constant wellspring for others. It is an exhausting task to keep the waters flowing when you yourself are thirsty, to be the one who gives and gives until the vessel is nearly empty. The history of the wise is often a story of learning how to conserve that vital liquid, ensuring that there is enough for the long trek across the desert of life. Your decision to stop loving everyone in that all-consuming way is an act of self-preservation, a gathering of your resources for the most important journey of all. Tonight, as you lie there, let the weight of the world lift from your shoulders, just for a moment. The history of your heart is still being written, but the ink is now moving at a slower, more deliberate pace. You are not becoming a stranger to the world. You perhaps become a more honest witness to it, one who knows that love is most beautiful when it has its own space to breathe. Sleep now, knowing that there is peace in the quiet, and there is strength in the letting go of all that was once too heavy to carry. The silence of the night has a way of pulling at the threads of memory, unraveling the tapestries we spent years weaving with the people around us. You lie there in the dim light, and as you close your eyes, you can almost feel the fading echoes of voices that used to fill every corner of your life. It is not that they have vanished entirely. They are still there, like the faint scent of old books or the ghost of a summer breeze, but their presence has lost its sharp edge. This process of forgetting is not an act of cruelty. It is the natural erosion caused by the relentless flow of time, much like the sea smoothing the jagged edges of a coastal cliff until only the soft curves remain. In the grand annals of history, we often focus on the moments of great conquest and sudden change, but the most profound shifts happen in the quiet, unrecorded intervals. We forget that names once carved into stone are eventually smoothed by the wind, and that even the most passionate vows were once just breath moving through the air. You might find yourself wondering if this fading is a loss of something vital, but perhaps it is simply the clearing of the archives to make room for the newness of tomorrow. The great forgetting is not an ending. It's a necessary shedding of old layers to reveal the essence that remains when the noise subsides. Consider the ancient ruins you have visited or read about, the majestic columns that once held up massive roofs, now standing as lonely sentinels under the moonlight. Those stones do not mourn the people who walked among them. They simply exist in a state of quiet being, no longer burdened by the weight of the crowds. You are undergoing a similar structural shift, where the emotional architecture of your life is settling into a new form. The people you once loved with a fierce, consuming intensity are becoming part of that ruinscape monumental figures who shaped your world but no longer demand your constant attention to keep them upright. There was a time when every name whispered in the dark felt like an urgent matter of state, a vital piece of information that required your immediate focus and care. Now, as you drift toward sleep, those names feel less like heavy burdens and more like distant stars, bright enough to guide you, but far enough away that they do not burn you. This is the wisdom of the years, to realize that memory is a selective tool meant to preserve the essence while letting the trivial details dissolve into the mist. The fading is the mind's way of protecting itself from the overwhelming clutter of an infinite past. Think back to the olden days when travelers would tell tales of lost cities and forgotten kings, places that once held the entire world in their grasp, but are now mere legends whispered by firelight. Your own history contains such vanished kingdoms, relationships, and connections that felt eternal, but have since been reclaimed by the dust of time. We often think we must hold on to every memory with a clenched fist to keep it alive, yet there is a strange, liberating power in letting our grip loosen just slightly. When you stop fighting the tide of forgetting, you find that you can float more easily upon the surface of your own life. The history of human thought is filled with the struggle between the desire to remember everything and the necessity of forgetting to survive. If we carried every single emotion and every single interaction as if it were happening in this very moment, our minds would be too crowded to house a single peaceful thought. The great forgetting is an act of mental housekeeping, a gentle sweeping away of the chaff so that the grain can be saved. You are learning that you do not need to remember the exact shade of a person's eyes or the specific cadence of their laughter to honor the time they spent in your life. As you breathe deeply, imagine the great libraries of old, where scrolls were sometimes lost to fire or dampness, leaving gaps in the history of the world. These gaps are not failures. They are simply empty spaces that allow the remaining text to be read with more clarity. Your own memory is a living document, constantly being revised by the passage of time and the wisdom of your soul. When you forget the sting of an old argument or the desperate need for someone's approval, you are making room for the peace that comes from a more streamlined existence. It was once thought that to forget was to lose, but history shows us that we often remember better when we have let go of the excess. The heavy weight of every slight and every grand gesture can become an anchor that keeps us from moving forward into our own future. By allowing the edges of your memories to soften, you are untethering yourself from the ghosts of who you used to be and who they used to be. You are becoming a more streamlined version of yourself, lighter and more capable of navigating the currents of the present hour. There is a certain melancholy in this realization, a soft sadness that drifts through your mind like smoke from an old hearth. But do not mistake this melancholy for grief. It is simply the emotional resonance of something changing its shape. The people who are fading from your immediate thoughts are not necessarily leaving you forever. They are simply moving into a different layer of your history, where they can be visited without causing turmoil. This is the grace of time. It turns the sharpest memories into soft, manageable echoes. In the ancient maps, there were vast terra incognita, unknown lands that filled the gaps between the known continents. Your own mind has these spaces now, empty territories where once there was a crowded map of human connection. Instead of trying to recolonize every inch of your heart with names and faces, try to sit in those unknown lands and appreciate the vastness. There is an incredible quietude in having less to manage, a sense of space that allows you to breathe without the friction of too much history rubbing against you. The stars do not fight the darkness. They exist because of it, and their light is only visible when the sun has set and the world has gone quiet. Similarly, your ability to find true peace depends on the dark spaces you create between your connections. If every moment was filled with the noise of social obligation and emotional intensity, there would be no room for the soul to reflect its own light. The fading is not an end to the connection. It is the creation of a necessary distance that makes the history meaningful. We often fear that as we forget, we lose our connection to the truth of what was. But the truth of a person's impact on you is rarely found in the minutiae of their presence. It is found in how they changed your path. Once the path has been forged, the specific footsteps taken upon it matter less than the direction in which you are now walking. You can carry the wisdom gained from an old love without needing to carry the person themselves through every waking hour. Imagine a great stone wall that has stood for 1,000 years, slowly being covered by ivy and moss until its original shape is hard to discern. The wall remains, but it has become something more, a part of the landscape, a living thing merged with the earth. Your memories are becoming like that wall. They are still there, providing structure and history, but they are also growing into something softer and more organic. The forgetting is simply the ivy wrapping around the stone, turning a hard memory into something beautiful and natural. In the quiet of your room, let the weight of those who have faded settle into the floorboards. They are not leaving you. They are becoming part of the foundation of who you are. The history of your heart is being rewritten to be more efficient, less cluttered, but no less profound. You do not need to hold on to every thread to know that the tapestry was magnificent. Let the threads loosen. Let the old names drift into the mists where they can rest without causing a storm in your soul. As you prepare to drift deeper into sleep, realize that this process is as natural as the moon waning toward its new phase. The diminishing light of your social focus is not a loss of power, but a gathering of energy for the quiet dark. You are becoming more whole by becoming less crowded. Let the old stories tuck themselves away in their velvet-lined drawers, and let the silence be your companion as you transition from the noise of history into the peace of the present. The great empires of old did not fall in a single night. They did not crumble with one sudden gust of wind, but rather through the slow, inexorable process of time, wearing down their mighty walls. You might feel that your own emotions are undergoing such a collapse, as if the grand structures you built around certain people are finally losing their structural integrity. But consider the ruins of Rome or the magnificent temples of Greece. They do not fall to become nothing. They fall to reveal the beautiful bones underneath. The dust of old empires is settling upon your heart, and in this shedding of grandeur, there is a profound opportunity for something more enduring to emerge. In the heyday of any great civilization, the streets were filled with the noise of commerce, war, and celebration, a constant, overwhelming pulse of life that demanded everything from its citizens. Your own heart once felt like such an empire, bustling with the constant movement of many different affections, all vying for a place in your soul's grand capital. But as you sit here in the quietness of the night, you realize that even the greatest empires must eventually face their twilight. The fading of those intense, driving passions is not a sign of decay, but a shift from a period of expansion to a period of reflection and preservation. Think of the massive stone blocks used to build the pyramids, heavy and unyielding in their permanence. We often try to build our relationships with that same sense of monumental weight, hoping they will stand forever against the shifting sands of time. Yet, even the heaviest stones eventually settle into the earth, becoming partfully buried, their sharp edges softened by the grit of the passing centuries. You are realizing that the weight you once carried for others was perhaps too heavy to sustain indefinitely. Letting that weight crumble is a way of finding your own footing again. There is a specific kind of silence that follows the fall of a great hall, a quietness that allows one to hear the wind whistling through the empty archways. This is the silence you are entering, a space where the grandiosity of loving everyone is replaced by the more manageable reality of being yourself. The history of your life is not a series of conquests meant to be defended at all costs, but a collection of experiences that have shaped the terrain of your spirit. When an old empire falls, it leaves behind fertile soil. When an old emotional structure fades, it leaves behind space for new wisdom to grow. In the ancient world, travelers would look upon the ruins of mighty cities and feel a sense of awe at what once was, yet they did not try to rebuild them exactly as they were. They took the stone. They used the old foundations to build something more suited to their current needs. You are doing the same with your own history. You are looking at the collapsed structures of your past loves and realizing that you don't need to rebuild those massive, taxing walls. Instead, you can use the wisdom from those stones to build a smaller, warmer, more efficient home for your soul. The dust of time has a way of coating everything we once held dear, making the sharp distinctions of the past feel a bit more blurred and indistinct. This blurring is not an error. It is a mercy provided by the universe to prevent us from being overwhelmed by the granular details of every single moment. If you could see every crack in the ancient masonry or remember every slight from 20 years ago with perfect clarity, your heart would be too heavy to move. The dust allows for a certain levelness, an evenness that permits us to walk through our own history without stumbling over every jagged edge. Consider the great kings who thought their dynasties would last forever, only to have their names become whispers in a dusty hall. Their ambition was vast, but it was also exhausting. They had to defend every border and appease every vassal. You are learning that your emotional borders do not need to be defended with such ferocity. By allowing the old empires of your affections to settle into history, you are reducing the constant labor of maintenance. You are moving from a life of defending vast territories to a life of tending a much smaller, but much more vital garden. The history of the world is often written by those who sought to hold on to power, yet the most lasting legacies are often found in the quiet influence of a single person's character. You used to think that loving everyone was your greatness, an expansive empire of the soul. But now you see that true strength lies in the ability to let the vastness subside so that the core can remain strong. It is not a loss of territory when you stop trying to love every passing stranger. It is simply the consolidation of your spirit into a more sustainable form. As you lie there, imagine the great libraries where ancient scrolls were once kept in massive, crowded halls. If those libraries were too full, they could no longer be managed. If they were too vast, the wisdom within was often lost in the clutter. Your heart is acting as its own librarian now, deciding which volumes to keep on the main shelves and which to place in the archives of history. This is not a dismissal of the old books, but an organization of your soul so that you can find peace when you look back at what you have learned. There was once a time when you felt you had to be the architect of everyone's happiness, building massive bridges of affection just to keep connections alive. But even the strongest bridges require constant upkeep, and sometimes they lead to places that are no longer worth visiting. The crumbling of these structures is an invitation to stop walking paths that only lead to exhaustion. You are learning to value the solid ground beneath your feet more than the grand, winding roads you used to traverse for others. The sun sets on every empire, casting long shadows that stretch across the landscape of time. In those long shadows, we see things differently. They reveal the contours of the land and the true shape of the mountains. Your own sunset of emotion is revealing the truth of your character, that you are enough, even without the grandiosity of 1,000 attachments. The dust that settles on these old memories is like the velvet covering an ancient artifact. It protects what is precious while letting the rest fade into a soft, beautiful obscurity. History tells us that when civilizations move from one era to another, they often leave behind their heavy ornaments to become something more streamlined and efficient. You are shedding your emotional ornaments, the grand gestures, the intense needs, the performative loves to find a leaner, perv-earst existence. This is not an act of shrinking. It is an act of refining. A smaller, well-tended hearth provides much more warmth than a massive, sprawling bonfire that burns too hot and too fast to last through the night. Think of the ancient sailors who used the stars to navigate vast, empty oceans. They did not try to own the sea. They simply used its movements to guide their course. You are learning to live with the tides of your emotions rather than trying to command them. The empires of your heart were once much larger, but as they recede into the history of your life, they leave behind a clear horizon for you to look upon. The weight of an empire is felt in the shoulders of its leaders. It is a heavy thing to carry. You are letting that weight fall away, allowing the structures of your past connections to become part of the landscape rather than something you must physically hold up. As they settle into the earth, they become the foundation for your current peace. The dust may be thick, but through it, you can see a much clearer path toward yourself. As you drift closer to sleep, let the grand architectures of your past fade into the soft mists of history. They served their purpose, and now they are returning to the earth to become something new. You do not need to hold up the ruins. You only need to honor them as you walk softly through the quiet fields of your own soul. In the ancient chronicles, there were times when a great king would retire from his throne to live in the silence of a mountain monastery or a secluded grove. He did not leave because he had lost his wisdom, nor because he had become bitter. He left because the noise of the court was becoming too loud for the soul to hear its own truth. You are entering a similar season, a quiet retreat from the social landscape that once demanded so much of your presence. This is not an act of isolation, but a strategic withdrawal to preserve the sanctity of your inner life. The wisdom of stepping back from the crowds is one of the oldest secrets known to humanity, an ancient necessity for those who wish to truly know themselves. Think of the great sages who wandered through ancient lands, often moving in solitude or within very small, tight-knit circles. They understood that the constant friction of many different personalities can wear down the spirit like a river wears down a stone. You have spent much of your life being a part of the crowd, a participant in the vast, noisy theater of human connection. Now you are learning that to step back is not to lose your place in the world, but to find a more meaningful place within it. The quietness you seek is not an empty space. It is a fertile ground for the soul to settle its own affairs. In the olden days, when a traveler reached a crossroads, they had to choose which path to follow, often leaving behind many other possibilities to pursue a single course of action. For a long time, you tried to walk every road simultaneously, attempting to hold a connection with everyone who crossed your path. It was an exhausting trek, a constant movement that left little room for the stillness required to truly arrive anywhere. By stepping back from the multitude, you are narrowing your focus, choosing a more deliberate pace that allows you to travel with greater intention and less fatigue. Consider the ancient libraries, where scholars would often retreat into quiet alcoves to study a single text or a single thought for years at a time. They knew that deep understanding requires a certain level of solitude, an environment free from the constant interruptions of the bustling streets outside. You are creating your own mental library now, setting aside some of the books and voices that were once loud but are no longer essential to your growth. This quiet retreat is the process of sorting through the vastness of human connection to find what truly resonates with the core of your being. There was always a temptation in the grand courts of old to be seen, to be known by everyone, and to maintain a presence that commanded attention from all sides. You might have felt that if you weren't actively engaging or loving, you were becoming invisible or unimportant. But history shows us that the most profound influences are often those who work quietly in the background, away from the spotlight of public affection. Stepping back is an act of reclaiming your energy from the gaze of others and turning it inward, where it can be used to nourish the quietest parts of your spirit. The stars do not compete for attention with the sun. They simply exist in their own space, shining with a light that is constant and unbothered by the clamor of the earth below. You are learning to find that celestial balance, to have enough connection to be human, but enough distance to remain yourself. The crowd can be a whirlwind of emotion, pulling you in directions that serve the group, but leave the individual adrift. By withdrawing into your own quietness, you are finding an anchor that is not dependent on the whims or the presence of others. In the history of many ancient civilizations, there were sacred periods of fasting and silence where the entire community would pull back from the noise to honor the divine. You might find yourself in a similar period, a season of emotional fasting where you are not seeking new connections or trying to sustain old ones with the same fervor. This is a time for your own spirit to feast on its own thoughts, to listen to the quietest whispers of your intuition without the interference of external opinions. It is a necessary fast to keep the soul from becoming too bloated with the needs and desires of others. The great walled cities of old were built not just to keep enemies out, but to create a defined space where life could happen in relative peace. Your own boundaries are like those ancient walls. They define your personal territory so that you can live within them without being constantly invaded by the needs of the world. Stepping back is the process of defining your borders, not to shut people out with malice, but to create a sanctuary for your own heart. It is much easier to maintain peace when you know where your kingdom ends and where the vastness begins. Imagine the ancient travelers who would stop at an inn, surrounded by many voices and stories, yet they always returned to their own small tent or room at night. That moment of returning to one's own space is a vital part of the human rhythm, the transition from the social back to the individual. You are learning that you can be among people without losing your center, but you must also know when it is time to pull the tent flaps shut and sit by your own small fire. The solitude you cultivate now is the fuel for the wisdom you will carry forever. There was a certain dignity in the way ancient monks would spend years of their lives in silence, often without ever leaving their cloisters or their cell. They were not hiding from the world. They were preparing themselves to be more fully present within it through the strength of their inwardness. You are not withdrawing because you are afraid of people. You are withdrawing so that when you do engage, you do so with a clarity and a depth that only comes from knowing your own soul. This is a time of preparation, an ancient ritual of the spirit. The history of great explorers tells us that they often had to leave the familiar shores to find new lands, but they also needed the stable base of their home ports to truly understand what they had found. If you are always at sea, you have no place to anchor your findings or rest your weary bones. This quiet retreat is a return to your own internal port, a place where you can process the discoveries of your life and find the strength to continue your voyage. The silence is not an end. It is the harbor that makes the journey possible. Think of the vast deserts where travelers would often walk for weeks in profound solitude, their only companions being the wind and the shifting sands. In those times, they learned things about themselves that could never be learned in a crowded marketplace or a bustling city. You are walking through your own desert right now, finding the clarity that comes from a lack of distraction. The people who once filled your days are becoming like distant oases visible on the horizon, but not something you need to rush toward with every step. It is often said that in the olden times, one could hear the thoughts of their neighbors over a simple garden fence, making life an intensely shared experience. While there is beauty in that intimacy, it can also be overwhelming for a spirit that needs more room to breathe. You are learning to move beyond the fence, seeking a space where you can exist without being constantly observed or judged by the community. This quietness is your own private garden, and its maintenance is yours alone to manage. The great mountains have stood in silence for eons, watching the clouds pass and the storms rage without ever losing their majestic composure. They do not need the applause of the wind to be grand. They simply are. You are learning to find that mountain-like stability within yourself, the ability to stand still even as the social tides rise and fall around you. Stepping back from the crowd allows you to grow into your own monumental self, solid and unmoving in the face of temporary turbulence. As you settle further into this thought, let the idea of retreat be a gentle one, like a soft cloak draped over your shoulders to keep out the chill of the world. It is an act of grace to know when enough is enough and to step back into the quietness where your soul can find its own rhythm. You are not being lonely. You are becoming whole. Let the silence wrap around you now, a peaceful boundary between you and the vastness of all that was and all that will be. In the ancient tapestries woven by hand in the great halls of old, there were threads so thin they seemed almost invisible to the naked eye, yet they held the entire design together. You may feel that your connections with others are like those fine, delicate filaments, easily broken, easily lost, and perhaps too fragile to be worth the effort of holding on to. But we must examine the frailty of human bonds, not as a reason for despair, but as a testament to their exquisite nature. To love is to handle something infinitely precious, yet immensely vulnerable. It is the realization that while these threads are thin, they are also what make the pattern of our lives so intricate and beautiful. Consider the ancient ships that sailed the great oceans, held together by ropes made of hemp and the strength of wooden pegs. Those sailors knew well that a single fraying line could change the course of a voyage or even lead to catastrophe. The bonds we form with others are much like those ropes. They are subject to the tension of life, the salt of tears, and the constant rubbing of different personalities against one another. To recognize their frailty is not to fear them, but to understand that they require a gentle hand and a wise understanding of their limits. In the olden days, when empires were built on alliances between houses, those treaties were often as fragile as parchment in a damp cellar. They were signed with great flourish and celebrated with feasts, yet they could dissolve with a single season of hardship or a change in the wind. You have experienced these shifts in your own life, the sudden thinning of a bond that once felt unbreakable. Understanding this frailty helps you realize that it was never meant to be eternal. It was meant to be meaningful for as long as the conditions allowed it to hold. There is a certain wisdom in observing how a spider weaves its web, a structure of breathtaking complexity and incredible strength, yet it can be swept away by a single heavy rain. The bonds we form are similarly intricate. They connect our hopes, our fears, and our histories. We often struggle because we expect these webs to be as permanent as the mountains, forgetting that their beauty lies in their lightness and their temporary nature. To love someone is to accept the inherent risk of the fraying edge, knowing that the tension is what makes the connection feel alive. Think of the ancient philosophers who studied the elements, the air, the fire, and the water. They understood that nothing in this world is static. Everything is in a constant state of becoming or decaying. Human bonds are not solid blocks of granite. They are more like the clouds or the tides, constantly shifting their shape and density. When we stop expecting our connections to be unyielding, we can begin to appreciate the fluid beauty of how they move through our lives, even when they change beyond recognition. In the grand histories of kings and queens, alliances were often forged in the heat of passion or the necessity of war, only to fade as generations passed into legend. You may feel a sense of loss when a bond weakens, but history suggests that this is simply the natural life cycle of human connection. A thread that thins does not always need to be replaced. Sometimes it just needs to be allowed to exist in its new, more delicate form. The frailty of the bond is what makes the time we spent within its weave so significant. Consider a hand-blown glass vessel from an ancient workshop, exquisite, clear, and capable of holding much, yet terrifyingly easy to shatter. We often carry our relationships with that same sense of precariousness, walking on eggshells to prevent a crack. But the history of your heart teaches you that even a broken vessel can be mended with gold, or its shards can become something entirely new. The frailty is not a defect. It is an invitation to handle our connections with the reverence they deserve. In many old traditions, there was a deep respect for the transient nature of life, the idea that we are all travelers passing through one another's lives like shadows on a sundial. If we viewed every bond as a permanent fixture, the weight would be unbearable. By acknowledging their frailty, we allow ourselves to hold people closely without the crushing expectation that they must remain exactly as they are forever. It is an act of letting go, even as we are holding on, a delicate balance of the soul. The history of human emotion is often a history of managing loss and the fraying of ties. We have always been a species that builds, breaks, and rebuilds our social structures to survive the changing seasons of existence. When you look at your own life, do not see the thinning bonds as failures. See them as the necessary thinning of the veil between who you were and who you are becoming. The frailty is the very thing that allows for growth, for the old must sometimes loosen so the new can find its place. Imagine a great stone archway. It is held together by the perfect balance of pressure and tension, where each piece relies on the other to remain upright. If one stone shifts slightly, the entire structure feels the change. This is how human bonds function. They are an interdependence that requires constant, subtle adjustment. When we realize that they are not meant to be static or indestructible, we can stop trying to force them into shapes they no longer fit. We learn to respect the tilt and the shift of the architecture. In the olden stories of the sea, sailors spoke of the ghost nets, the invisible currents and tides that pull at a vessel without any visible hand. Sometimes our connections feel as though they are being pulled apart by unseen forces, time, distance, or simply the changing of the heart. Understanding this flaw helps us realize that it is not always a failure of will. Sometimes the current is simply moving in a different direction. We must learn to navigate these shifts with grace rather than fighting the inevitable pull. There was once a time when you thought that for a bond to be real, it had to be indestructible. You might have felt that if a connection wavered, it meant it was failing. But history shows us that even the most vital bonds can have seasons of weakness. A thread that is thin does not necessarily mean the connection is lost. It may simply mean the connection has changed its purpose from carrying weight to merely being a delicate decoration in your life. Consider the ancient parchment, so thin and susceptible to the touch of human hands, yet capable of preserving the wisdom of millennia. The fragility of our connections is what allows them to carry the weight of our deepest truths. If they were made of iron, they would be too heavy to carry. Because they are made of something softer, we can weave them into the very fabric of our being. It is a beautiful paradox. The most meaningful things are often the most fragile. In the history of every great house or dynasty, there were times when the family ties became strained and thin, yet those people still shared a common history. You might find that your current connections are losing their strength, but they still hold the shape of what you once were together. This is not a tragedy. It is a transition. We must learn to honor the tension of the bond while accepting its capacity to stretch and eventually settle into a new form. As you lie there in the stillness, let the frailty of your connections bring you a sense of release. You do not need to be the one who holds every thread tight. You can trust that the strength of the weave is enough for now. Let the thinness of the bonds remind you to be gentle with yourself and others. In the quiet darkness, realize that even the most delicate connection is a magnificent thing to have held. And there is peace in letting it exist, just as it is, fragile, beautiful, and fleeting. In the vast archives of human history, there are entire civilizations that vanished into the mists of time, leaving behind nothing but half-buried ruins and names whispered by travelers in a foreign land. They were once real, they were once vibrant, and they were once the center of someone's universe. Yet now, they exist only as ghosts within the fog of the past. You may feel as though your own memories are being swallowed by a similar haze, a sense that the people and moments you once held so tightly are drifting into an unreachable distance. This is not a loss of truth. It is the natural movement of history into its more mysterious, ethereal state. To be lost in the fog of time is to realize that some things are meant to be felt as shadows rather than seen as solid objects. Think of the great explorers who sailed toward the edge of the known world, guided by maps that were often incomplete or entirely speculative. They navigated through thick sea mists where the horizon vanished, and for a time, they were lost in a white void where nothing was certain. Your own life has these seasons times when the clarity of your connections fades, and you cannot see clearly who is beside you or where the path leads. This fog is not an obstacle to be fought. It is a veil that allows the soul to rest from the sharp, blinding light of reality. In the olden days, travelers would tell legends of cities swallowed by the desert sands or lost beneath the rising tides of the sea. These places were once filled with life, but they have been reclaimed by the elements, becoming part of a vast, hazy mystery. You are experiencing a similar reclamation within your own mind. The intense clarity of a past emotion is being softened by the fog of time, making the sharp edges of heartbreak or the heavy weight of longing feel more like a distant memory than an immediate pain. This fading is how we survive our own histories. It allows us to carry the essence without being crushed by the mass. There is a profound stillness in the mist, a quietness that muffles the sounds of the world and forces one to look inward. When you feel lost in the fog of your own history, when the names and faces of those who once meant everything seem to blur into a singular, indistinct shape, do not panic. This is the soul's way of creating a buffer between the present and the overwhelming volume of the past. The fog provides a space where we can wander without the constant demand of being certain. It is an invitation to exist in the gray area, finding peace in the ambiguity of what was once clear. Consider the ancient scribes who worked on delicate parchments that would eventually yellow and fade until the ink became nearly invisible. The history written there is still there, but it requires a different kinds of vision to read, a more intuitive, soulful sight. Your memories are undergoing this transition. They are becoming less about the hard facts and more about the atmospheric truth of how you felt. When we lose the sharp detail of an old connection, we often find its true spirit remains, hovering in the mist like a guiding light. In the grand tapestries of ancient empires, there were vast stretches of unmapped territory where legends were born from nothingness. You may feel that your own life is becoming somewhat unmappable as you let go of certainties and old attachments. But without those empty, foggy spaces on our internal maps, we would have no room for wonder or the possibility of new discoveries. The fog of time isn't a wall. It is the space between the islands of our lives, allowing us to see the vastness that connects everything. There was once a belief in ancient cultures that the veil between this world and the spirit world was often thin, especially when the mist rolled in from the mountains or the sea. In those moments, it was as if time itself had slowed down, blending the living with the ancestors. You are walking through your own thin places now, where the boundary between who you were and who you are is becoming blurred. Do not fear this blurring. It is a sacred space where we can reconcile our past selves with the quiet wisdom of our present moment. The history of human emotion is often a struggle against the fog. We want everything to be clear, black or white, here or there. We fight the mist because we crave the certainty of solid ground beneath our feet. But as you sit in your own silence tonight, realize that much of the most beautiful truth exists in the nuances of the gray. The people who have faded into your history are not truly gone if they still shape the atmosphere of your soul. They are simply parts of a magnificent, misty landscape that you are learning to inhabit with peace. Imagine an ancient walled garden where the morning fog is so thick that you can only see one step ahead of you. You cannot see the gates, nor can you see the path that leads back to the city. You can only focus on the immediate ground. This is a metaphor for how we must often live when our past becomes a heavy cloud. We do not need to solve the entire mystery of our history in one night. We only need to take the next step, trusting that the fog will lift or settle as it needs to. The stars are often hidden by clouds and mist, yet they do not cease to exist. They simply wait for a clearer moment to reveal their brilliance. In the same way, the truths of your relationships, the love, the lessons, the growth are still there, even when they are obscured by the fog of time or the confusion of loss. We must learn to trust that the light is still present, even when our vision is clouded. The history of a star is not diminished because it is hidden from view for a season. In the olden stories of sailors, they spoke of the doldrums, a period of thick, heavy air where there was little wind and the sea seemed to stand still. It was a time of great uncertainty, yet it was also a necessary pause in their journey. Your own sense of being lost in the fog might be your personal doldrums, a quiet interval where you are meant to wait for the winds of change to blow once more. Do not rush through the mist. There is much to learn from the stillness of the haze. We often think of history as a series of clear, hard events. Wars fought, kings crowned, treaties signed. But the real history of our lives is the hazy, atmospheric part, the feelings that linger, the ghosts of old loves, the quiet shifts in character. When we try to force ourselves to live only in the hard facts of the past, we miss the depth of the human experience. The fog reminds us that truth is often something felt rather than measured. It is a texture of the soul. Think of ancient ruins where the stone has been worn so smooth by wind and sand that you can no longer tell what the original carvings were meant to say. The meaning is still there, but it has become an impression, a feeling left behind on the surface. Your own history is becoming such a landscape, a place of beautiful impressions rather than sharp edges. This does not make the history less real. It makes it more eternal. As you lie in your bed, let the fog of time wrap around you like a soft, cooling blanket. It is okay to not have all the answers tonight. It is okay if some names and faces are drifting away into the mist. They are simply moving to a place where they can rest without being heavy. You are learning that to be lost in the fog is sometimes the most direct path to finding yourself. Let your breathing become as rhythmic and slow as the movement of a thick white mist over an ancient valley. There is no need to fight the blurring. There is only the need to exist within it. As you drift towards sleep, know that even in the fog, you are guided by the quietest truths of your own being. In the grand architectural history of the world, there are cathedrals that have stood for 1,000 years. Their massive halls once filled with the chanting voices of thousands. But today, many such places stand as silent monuments, their empty nave catching nothing but the drifting dust and the occasional sigh of the wind. To walk through an abandoned cathedral is to experience the silence of empty halls, a space that was once vibrant but now exists in a state of profound, hollow peace. You may feel as though your own life is undergoing such an emptying, as if the people who filled your emotional halls have departed, leaving you with nothing but the vastness of your own thoughts. But there is a sacredness in this silence, a quietude that allows the soul to hear its own resonance without the interference of worldly noise. In the olden days, when a great hall was vacated by its inhabitants, it did not become empty in the sense of being void. Rather, it became filled with something else, the weight of history and the presence of stillness. You are finding that as you stop loving everyone with the frantic energy of your youth, you are not becoming empty. You are making room for a much deeper kind, more contemplative presence. The silence is not an absence of life, but a different mode of being, where the echoes of what once was provide the music for the present moment. Think of the great walled citadels that were once bustling with guards, merchants, and families. When they were abandoned, the stone remained unmoving, ancient, and dignified. The people who left are gone, yet the structure itself remains a testament to their existence. Your heart is like one of those ancient halls. It has been inhabited by many different lives, but you are learning that even when the inhabitants move on, the architecture of your soul remains. The silence in your empty halls is not a sign of loneliness, but a structural peace where you can finally exist without the need for constant occupation. In the history of every great estate, there were rooms that were once used daily: the kitchens, the libraries, the grand parlors. Over time, some of these rooms are closed off, their doors left shut to preserve the stillness within. You are beginning to close certain doors in your own heart, letting the dust settle on old connections and letting the silence inhabit those spaces. This is not a tragedy. It is an act of preservation. By allowing some halls to become silent, you protect the energy required for the rooms where you still live and breathe. There was once a time when every corner of your being felt like it needed to be filled with someone else's presence, as if silence were something to be feared or conquered. But in the quietness of the night, you realize that the empty hall is a place where one can truly encounter themselves. The silence of abandoned halls is a mirror. It reflects the truth of who you are when there is no one left to perform for, no one to please, and no one to hold. It is in this stillness that the most honest history is written. Consider the ancient ruins where travelers wander alone, the empty amphitheaters where the cheers have long since died away. There is a melancholy beauty in those empty spaces, a sense of time standing still. You are learning to inhabit your own internal ruins with grace, recognizing that even if a connection is no longer active, its place in your history remains a beautiful, silent structure. The silence does not erase the past. It honors it by giving it a quiet space to exist without being constantly disturbed. In the olden times, when a traveler entered an abandoned temple, they often felt the presence of something much larger than themselves, the weight of time itself. Your own inner silence is like that temple. It is a place where you can step out of the rush of human history and into the eternal stillness of your own existence. The empty halls of your mind are not meant to be filled with every passing thought or every fleeting face. They are meant to hold the vastness of being. The history of architecture tells us that a building's strength is often found in its hollow spaces, the arches, the vaults, and the voids that allow for movement and light. If a hall was completely solid, it could not be a cathedral. It would just be a block of stone. Your own emptiness is your strength. It is the capacity to hold breath, to let thoughts pass through, and to exist in a state of openness. The silence of these halls is what makes you capable of greatness. There was once an era when people lived so closely together that privacy was a luxury few could afford. Today, as you sit in your own solitude, you are reclaiming the ancient luxury of being alone with one's thoughts. This quietness allows you to examine the architecture of your character, to see where the pillars are strong and where they might need more support. The silence is not an end. It is a diagnostic tool for the soul, helping you understand what truly sustains you. In the great libraries that were lost to history, there are empty shelves where precious volumes once sat. We often mourn the loss of those books, but we must also realize that the emptiness left behind is part of the story. Your own empty connections, the ones that have faded into a silent memory, are like those empty shelves. They provide the context for the books you still carry with you. The silence of an empty hall is simply the space where a chapter is concluded. Think of a vast old manor house in the countryside, its corridors long and its shadows deep. To live there alone would be to face one's own history every single day. You are learning to navigate your own internal manor, walking through the hallways of your memory with a lantern of wisdom. The silence you encounter is not something to be feared. It is a companion that keeps you honest as you walk among the echoes of your past. There was once a belief in ancient times that the gods resided in the quietest, most remote parts of the world, the empty valleys and the silent mountaintops. In a sense, we are finding our own divinity in the silence of our lives. When we stop trying to fill every moment with human interaction, we find a connection to something more profound, a sense of peace that transcends the noise of the crowd. The silence is where we meet ourselves. The history of music tells us that it is the silent space between the notes that makes the melody beautiful. Without the rest, there would be only a wall of sound, an overwhelming and chaotic noise. Your own life needs these rests, these silences where nothing is happening. No one is being loved or lost, and the soul can simply breathe. The empty halls are the rests in your life's symphony, providing the structure that allows the music to be heard. As you lie there, let the silence of your own heart become a vast, welcoming hall. Do not feel the need to fill it with voices or the bustling thoughts of the day. Let the echoes of the past settle into their places, and let the stillness be a sanctuary. You are learning that even in an empty hall, you are never truly alone. You have the strength of your own history to keep you company in the quiet dark. Let the silence wrap around you like the velvet curtains of an old theater after the final curtain has fallen. There is nothing left to perform and no one left to impress. The show is over for today, and there is a deep restorative peace in simply sitting in the dark, listening to the magnificent stillness of your own being. In the ancient groves where the great philosophers once walked, there was a profound understanding that the mind could only find clarity when it learned to observe the world without being swept away by its turbulence. They practiced the art of being in the world, but not of it a delicate balance between engagement and detachment. As you lie in your own quiet chamber tonight, consider how the wisdom of the Stoics might offer a lantern for your path. To learn from the ancient philosophers is to understand that while we cannot control the winds that blow or the people who enter our lives, we can certainly control the inner citadel where our peace resides. The lesson of the Stoic mind is not about becoming cold. It's about becoming stable. In the olden days, a wise leader would know when to listen and when to remain silent, understanding that an unbridled emotion could cloud even the most brilliant judgment. You have often felt the storm of your own affections, the sudden gusts of passion or the heavy rains of longing, and you have felt the mercy of those feelings. But the wisdom of history suggests a different path, to feel deeply, but to hold the feeling with a steady hand. This is the essence of Stoic thought, where we recognize that our attachments should not be so heavy that they uproot us from our own foundation. Consider the great statues of antiquity, the marble figures that have stood for centuries, weather-beaten yet unmoving in their composure. They do not even blink when the storms lash against them or the sun bakes their surface. They simply exist in a state of perfect, poised observation. While we are flesh and blood, and far more susceptible to change than stone, we can strive to cultivate that same sense of inner stillness. By learning to love with a detached mind, you are not loving less. You are loving with a clarity that prevents the chaos of one person's whims from destroying your own internal order. There was once a time when it was thought that a wise man must be an island, separate and alone to maintain his virtue. But even the most solitary sage knew that human connections were part of the human condition, necessary, but something to be handled with care. You are learning that you can have people in your life without giving them the power to dictate your entire emotional state. This is not a retreat into selfishness, but a cultivation of self-sufficiency. ensuring that your happiness is anchored in your own character rather than just the presence of others. In the history of the great empires, those who were too emotionally tied to their successes or their losses often found themselves broken when the tides turned. The leaders who endured were those who could hold their grief and their joy with a balanced hand. As you reflect on your own life, see how many times an intense attachment led to a period of instability. By practicing a gentle detachment, you are building a buffer between your peace and the shifting sands of human loyalty and affection. The philosophers taught that we suffer not because of what happens in the world, but because of our judgments about what happens. When we hold on to an old love or a lost friendship with a desperate need for it to remain exactly as it was, we create our own suffering. A detached mind recognizes that people are like the seasons. They arrive, they stay for a while, and then they move on according to their own nature. To accept this is not to stop loving. It is to love in a way that respects the natural cycle of human life. Think of an ancient archer whose focus must be absolute yet relaxed. If his grip is too tight, the arrow will fly erratically. If it is too loose, he cannot aim with precision. Your affections are like those arrows. They require a firm but gentle hold to fulfill their purpose in your life. The wisdom you seek is found in that perfect tension, being present enough to love deeply, yet detached enough to let go when the time comes. This balance is the hallmark of a soul that has learned from the masters. In many ancient traditions, there was a concept of the witness, a part of the self that observes all experiences without becoming lost in them. You are learning to become the witness of your own history, watching the rise and fall of your emotions as if they were clouds passing across an endless sky. When you observe the fading of an affection rather than fighting it, you transform a potential tragedy into a moment of profound insight. This is how we remain whole while everything around us changes. Consider the ancient gardens designed with precise geometry, where paths were clear and boundaries were meaningful. The Stoic approach to life is much like this. It provides a structure for our emotions so they do not overflow their banks. By creating these internal borders, you allow your heart to be a place of order rather than a chaotic wilderness. A structured love is one that can endure the long years because it does not rely on constant intensity to remain valid. There was once a belief that to be truly virtuous, one must transcend the needs of the flesh and the whims of the heart. While you are still a being of deep feeling, you can use this ancient wisdom to find a more sustainable way to exist. When we stop trying to own the affection of others, we free ourselves from the constant cycle of seeking validation. The goal is to be a person who is complete within themselves, making their love a gift rather than a desperate need for completion. In the grand libraries of old, the most valued texts were those that remained calm and unmoving even as the centuries passed. They did not change with the fashion of the era. They held to their truths. You are building an internal library of wisdom, a collection of insights that remain stable regardless of who comes or goes from your life. A detached mind is like a well-organized archive. It knows where every memory belongs, and nothing is lost because everything is in its proper place. The history of the great thinkers shows us that solitude was often the laboratory for the greatest discoveries of human thought. When we are too busy being loved or loving others, we have little time to examine the truth of our own existence. The quietness you find in your detachment is not a lonely void. It's the fertile space where wisdom is forged. By stepping back from the crowd, you are making room for the most important conversation, the one between yourself and the universe. There was once an ancient idea that we are all composed of the same elements as the stars, fire, air, earth, and water. To understand these elements is to understand why they sometimes flare up and sometimes cool down. Your emotions are natural phenomena. They have their own weather patterns. A Stoic mind does not try to stop the rain or command the sun. It simply prepares itself for the storm and finds a way to remain upright during the gale. As you lie there, Let the wisdom of the ages settle into your bones like a warm, steadying presence. Do not fear the fading of intensity. Celebrate the rising of clarity. You are becoming more like the ancient sages, not by losing your humanity, but by refining it into something that can withstand the passage of time. The history of your life is being written with a steadier hand, and there is profound peace in this newfound balance. Allow yourself to be the silent observer of your own thoughts tonight. Let the old loves and the old losses drift past you like ships on a vast, dark sea. They are beautiful, but they do not need to anchor themselves in your heart to be real. Sleep now with a mind that is clear, a spirit that is calm, and a soul that knows how to find its own center amidst the shifting tides of existence. In the grand cycles of nature, there is no permanent summer. Even the most vibrant fields must eventually yield to the cooling winds and the quietude of autumn. The seasons do not struggle against their change. The trees do not fight the falling of their leaves, nor does the earth weep for the shorter days. You are experiencing a seasonal shift within your own soul, an emotional winter that follows a long blooming summer of intense connections. Understanding the seasonal cycle of emotion is to realize that there is no permanence in feeling. What was once a roaring fire must eventually become a gentle glow to sustain the life that remains. In the olden days, people lived by the rhythms of the moon and the harvest, knowing instinctively that every period of growth was followed by a period of rest. They understood that if they tried to force a perpetual harvest, the soil would be depleted and the spirit would wither. You have spent much of your life in a season of expansion, where you are constantly reaching out, growing toward others, and seeking the warmth of new connections. But even the most fertile heart needs a period of dormancy, a time when the energy moves from the outward bloom to the inward roots. Consider the history of the earth itself, the way it breathes through long ages of ice and heat. The transition is often slow, almost imperceptible, until one day you wake up and realize that the landscape has changed entirely. You might feel a sense of loss as your own passions cool, but this is merely the natural movement toward a more sustainable existence. To understand the seasons is to know that the cold is not an enemy. It is the quiet time when we gather our strength for the next great unfolding. There was once a belief in many ancient cultures that human life was a series of cycles, much like the celestial bodies above. We were taught that there is a time to sow and a time to reap, but also a time to let the fields lie empty and silent. Your decision to step back from the constant need for connection is your own wintering, a necessary period where you conserve your vital energy. This is not a fading of your spirit. It is a strategic gathering of yourself so that you may bloom again with more wisdom in the years to come. In the grand history of every great forest, there are seasons when the canopy thins and the light reaches the floor in new, unexpected ways. When we allow our social connections to thin or fade, we are letting a new kind of light into the deep, shaded parts of our soul. This is not an empty space. It is the illumination of our own inner landscape. The cooling of your affections allows you to see what was once hidden in the dense thicket of human interaction. The truth of who you are when nothing is blooming. Think of the ancient travelers who watched the stars change their positions as the months turned from one to the next. They knew that a star that vanished from the visible sky was not gone, but simply moving into a different part of the then cycle. Your old loves and connections have not disappeared. They have merely moved into a different phase of your life's orbit. They are still there, providing the context for your current position, even if they are no longer as bright or as visible to you. In the history of human emotion, we often prize the heat of passion above all else, seeing it as the ultimate validation of a meaningful life. But the frost is just as vital. It defines the boundaries and provides the stillness necessary for reflection. If every moment were spent in the heat of connection, there would be no time to integrate what we have learned or to find our own independent strength. The cooling of your heart is an invitation to move from the external warmth of others toward the internal warmth of your own being. There was once a great respect for the fallow field, the land that is left, unplanted for a season so that its nutrients can return to the soil. You are currently in a fallow period of your soul, where you are not seeking new attachments or trying to sustain old ones with the same intensity. This is a time of replenishment. By allowing yourself this space, you are ensuring that when you do choose to connect again, you will do so from a place of abundance rather than from a place of hunger. Consider the ancient sundials. As the sun moves across the sky, the shadow shifts, lengthening or shortening with the passing of the hours. Our emotions are much like those shadows. They expand and contract based on the light we carry within us. The waning of your outward passion is not a permanent darkening, but a shift in the angle of your soul's light. It is an adjustment to the natural rhythm of existence, moving from the long days of expansion to the shorter, more focused hours of reflection. In the history of every civilization, there are times of great prosperity and times of quiet contraction. Both are essential for the survival and evolution of a culture. You might feel that your current state is one of contraction, but it is actually an essential period of refining your focus. We learn more in the lean years than we do in the years of plenty. We learn who our true allies are and what truly matters to our own endurance. There was once a concept of the dark half of the year, when the world seemed to hold its breath and wait for the return of the sun. During these times, the focus shifted from the visible work of the hands to the invisible work of the spirit. Your current season is your own dark half, a time to move away from the outward bustle and toward the quietedness within. This is not a period of being less. It is a period of becoming more centered. We often fight the cooling of our emotions because we fear that if the fire goes out, there will be nothing left but cold ash. But in history, we see that the hearth must be cleaned and the embers must be tended so that they do not burn too wildly or consume their fuel too quickly. The seasonal cycle teaches us that a steady, managed warmth is more enduring than a wild blaze. To embrace the cooling is to honor the longevity of your own spirit. Think of the ancient sailors who looked at the sea and knew when the winds were turning toward a colder current. They did not fight the change. They adjusted their sails and prepared for the different nature of the voyage. Your emotional seasons require the same kind to navigate with grace. When you stop fighting the cooling of your heart, you find that you can sail much more easily through the calmer waters of existence. In the history of human connections, there are always those who are meant only for a season of summer romance or a brief but intense friendship. To hold on to them as if they were winter-hardy trees is to invite unnecessary struggle. Learning to let the seasonal people move with the wind is an act of wisdom that protects your core. They served their purpose in your life, and now they are returning to the great cycle from which they came. As you lie there, feel the cool, refreshing air of this emotional winter settling over you like a gentle frost. Do not fear the absence of heat. Embrace the clarity that comes with the coolness. You are preparing for something deep and meaningful, a quiet strength that only those who have walked through the seasons can truly possess. Sleep now, knowing that every end is merely the preparation for a new beginning. In the quiet corners of history, there are legends of phantoms, the ghostly shadows of people who have long since departed, yet whose presence lingers in a drafty hallway or an old, forgotten locket. You may find that as you move through your own life, these ghosts of past loves and lost connections still occasionally brush against your thoughts, making you feel the chill of their absence. These are the ghostly shadows of past lovers, the emotional specters that haunt the edges of our minds. To deal with them is not to banish them with a heavy hand, but to learn how to live in a house where they are silent guests, neither driving them out nor letting them take up too much room. In the olden days, when travelers spoke of ghosts, they did not always mean something frightening. Often, it was simply the memory of a soul that had left its mark upon the world. Your own history is populated by these shadows, the people who once held your heart with such intensity that their absence still feels like a physical weight. We often struggle because we try to make these ghosts solid again. trying to breathe life back into something that has naturally passed into the history of our lives. To deal with the shadow is to realize that it can exist without being able to touch you. Consider the great cathedrals where stained glass windows cast colorful, moving shadows upon the stone floors as the sun moves through the day. The shadows are beautiful, but they are not the light itself. They are merely an effect of a presence that was there. Your past affections can be like those moving shapes on the floor, vibrant and evocative, yet fundamentally made of nothing more enough than memory and light. If you stop trying to grab at the shadow to make it solid, you will find it is much easier to walk through the hall without tripping over the past. In the history of human connection, we often carry the grief of a lost bond as if it were a living thing that needs constant feeding. But a ghost only stays heavy if we give it our weight. If we remain light and centered, the shadow becomes a mere whisper in the wind. The phantoms of your past are not there to haunt you with sorrow, but to remind you of the capacity you have for deep feeling. They are echoes of who you were when you loved, serving as a soft testament to your own emotional history. There was once an ancient understanding that ghosts were simply the energy of what used to be, the residue of a life well lived or a love well felt. When we encounter these shadows in our minds, they are not there to pull us back into the past, but to remind us of the lessons they taught us. To live with the ghosts is to acknowledge them. You were here, you were loved, and now you belong to the history of my soul. This recognition allows the shadow to settle into its proper place, no longer a specter of loss, but a quiet inhabit of your memory. Think of an ancient ruin where the shadows of columns stretch across the ground at dusk. They look like they could be solid pillars, yet a hand can pass right through them. We often treat our past loves as if they were still physical presences we must negotiate with every day. But by understanding their ghostly nature, you can learn to walk among them without fear. They are there to provide shape to your history, not to block the path of your present journey. In many old traditions, it was believed that one could commune with the spirits through silence and reflection. Your own moments of solitude are often when these shadows appear most clearly, when the noise of the world dies down and the memories rise to the surface. This is not a haunting. It is an internal dialogue between your current self and your past selves. If you greet these phantoms with kindness rather than resistance, they will cease to be frightening and become instead like old friends visited in thought. The history of our hearts is often a graveyard of beautiful things that could not last. We often feel the need to build monuments to those who are gone, trying to keep their memory from fading into nothingness. But a monument can be heavy, and sometimes we carry too much stone on our shoulders. The ghosts do not need you to build them massive statues. They only need you to remember that they once were part of your story. By letting the shadow remain a shadow, you free yourself from the labor of keeping it alive through sheer will. There was an old belief that shadows are the soul's way of showing us where there is still light left in the room. Your past loves and connections are much like this. They are the dark shapes cast by the great lights of your life's experiences. If you look at them not as something to be feared, but as a natural consequence of having lived vibramente, they become easier to manage. They are simply the beautiful, dark contours of a soul that has known warmth. In the grand tapestries of history, there are figures whose names we do not know, yet their influence shaped entire eras. These are the quiet ghosts of humanity. You may have many such people in your own life, those who were vital for a season but left no name behind. Do not feel that these connections were less important because they are now mere shadows. They were necessary to create the depth and texture of the person you are today. Consider the ancient moon, which has phases where it is a slight sliver and phases where it is full and bright. The dark moon still exists, even when its light is gone from our sight. Similarly, your past connections still exist in their own way, but they are currently in their dark phase. They do not need to be illuminated for them to be part of the cosmic truth of your life. To live with the shadows is to understand that the darkness is just a different form of presence. There was once a wisdom that taught us to look at the shadow and see only the light that created it. When you feel the sting of an old love's ghost, remember that the shadow can only exist because there was once a great warmth to cast it. This perspective shifts the focus from the loss to the original beauty of the connection. The ghosts are not meant to be enemies. They are simply the lingering footprints of where you once stood in the light. In the history of the mind, we often try to exorcise our sorrows as if they were demons to be driven away. But a ghost is just a memory that has lost its anchor. If you stop trying to fight the presence of the past, it loses its power to haunt and instead becomes a quiet companion in your inner landscape. You do not need to defeat the shadows. You only need to learn how to walk with them without letting them lead you astray. As you lie there, let the ghosts of your past settle into their own quiet corners. They are just echoes, beautiful and weightless. Do not fear the chill they bring. It is merely a reminder that you once felt the warmth. Allow them to be what they are, memories without bodies, whispers without voices. In the stillness, they can finally find peace, and in their peace, you will find your own. Let your breath become as steady as the turning of an ancient hourglass, where every grain of sand is a moment passing from the present into the history of the past. The shadows may dance in the corners of your vision, but they cannot touch the core of your being unless you invite them to. Sleep now with a heart that is at peace with its own ghosts, knowing that even in the dark, there is an exquisite grace to being remembered. In the ancient academies of philosophy, there was a profound study of balance, a golden mean that sat between two extremes. To be too much of one thing, or to lack enough of another, was seen as an imbalance that disturbed the soul's harmony. You are currently exploring this delicate terrain, the art of gentle detachment. This is not a pursuit of coldness, nor is it a retreat into total isolation. Rather, it is finding the middle ground between being consumed by others and being closed off from the world. It is learning how to hold the warmth of connection without letting its heat burn you, or let its cold leave you empty. In the olden days, when travelers crossed vast mountain ranges, they knew that if they carried too much water, they would tire. Yet if they carried too little, they would perish. The wise traveler knows exactly how much to carry for the journey ahead. You are learning this vital wisdom for your emotional life, how much of yourself to give and how much to reserve. To practice gentle detachment is to know that you can be present in a conversation or a relationship without losing the sovereignty of your own spirit. It is the art of being with someone while still remaining yourself. Consider the ancient wisdom of the archer once more, but focus now on the release. The arrow must leave the bow to fulfill its purpose. If the archer held onto it too tightly, the flight would be stunted. We often struggle because we hold on to our connections with a grip that is too tight, fearing that any loosening will mean an absolute loss. But in the history of human experience, we see that a firm but gentle release allows for a more beautiful and purposeful life. To let go is not to lose. It is to allow the connection to move as intended. In the grand architecture of ancient gardens, there were paths that led to clearings and walls that provided privacy. There was always a balance between the open beauty of the vista and the intimate shelter of the grove. You are constructing your own internal garden now. The walls you build are not meant to be impregnable fortresses, but rather to provide a sense of structure to your affections. By defining where your influence ends, you create the space necessary for healthy growth within yourself and with those around you. There was once a belief in many ancient cultures that harmony was achieved when one could observe a storm without being swept away by it. You are learning how to be the observer of your own emotions, to feel the swell of love or the dip of loneliness without letting them crash over your identity. This is the essence of detachment. It is not about feeling nothing, but about feeling everything while remaining anchored in your own center. It is a way to stay upright when the winds of human opinion and emotion blow fierce. In the history of maritime travel, sailors had to manage their ropes so that they were tight enough to catch the wind, but loose enough to prevent the ship from being torn apart by a sudden gust. The tension must be managed. Too much or too little is equally dangerous. You are learning to manage the tension of your human bonds. When you stop trying to tighten every connection until it is taut, you find that the relationship can breathe more easily. A gentle grip allows for the flexibility needed to survive the storms of life. In the olden times, when a scholar studied ancient texts, they would often sit in a room where the light was sufficient, but not blinding. They sought a clarity that allowed them to see the fine details without being overwhelmed by the glare. You are seeking this same clarity in your own heart, a way to see people as they truly are, rather than through the distorted lens of our own needs or fears. Detachment is the clear lens. It allows us to love others more authentically, because we aren't looking for them to fulfill a role in our own drama. There was once an ancient idea that one should be like water, able to flow around obstacles, yet remaining pure in essence. To be much like water is to have the ability to connect deeply while also having the capacity to move through life with grace. You are learning how to be fluid, to hold a connection when it is there, and let it flow away when its time has come. This is not an act of fickleness. It's an act of being in harmony with the natural movement of all things. In the great libraries of old, books were kept in cabinets that protected them from the air, while still allowing them to be accessed for study. They were neither hidden away in a dark vault nor left out in the rain. You are learning how to house your affections, keeping them safe within your heart, yet making them accessible when they are needed. This is the balance of the wise to keep our connections meaningful, but not so, exposed that they are lost to the elements of neglect or misunderism. The history of human connection shows us that those who demand everything from a bond often end up with nothing left but exhaustion. There was always a cost to every intense alliance in the ancient world, and the most successful were those who understood the economy of emotion. By practicing gentle detachment, you are becoming a better steward of your own energy. You are ensuring that you have enough strength to sustain yourself, making your presence in the lives of others more stable and reliable. Consider the moon as it waxes and wanes. It is never just one thing, yet its essence remains constant. We often think we must be a full moon every single night to be worthy of love or connection. But the history of the heavens tells us that there is beauty in being a sliver of light, too. Detachment allows you to accept your own phases, to know that even when you are not at your most radiant socially, you are still whole and significant. In the ancient traditions of tea ceremonies, there was a profound focus on the moment, the careful pouring, the warmth of the cup, the silence of the room. It was an exercise in being fully present without the need to possess the tea or the vessel. You are learning to live your relationships with that same focused presence, to cherish the moment of connection without the frantic need to own the person or freeze time. This is how we find peace within the transient nature of human life. There was once a concept called equanimity, the ability to remain calm and composed regardless of what happens around you. While it sounds impossible to some, it is actually a practical tool for living well. It means that when someone leaves or a connection shifts, your core remains unshackled. You are building this equanimity through the practice of detachment. It allows you to step into the world with a brave heart, knowing that while you may be affected by things, you will not be destroyed by them. In the history of every great explorer, there was a need for a clear mind to navigate the unknown. If they were too emotionally attached to the shore they left behind, they would never truly explore. You are learning how to leave certain shores behind, allowing yourself to move into new territories of being. Detachment is not about leaving people. It's about ensuring that you can keep moving forward, even when parts of your history are being left in the wake. As you settle into a deeper state of rest, let the concept of the middle way soothe your spirit. You do not need to be a hermit, nor do you need to be a socialite. You only need to be yourself. The balance you seek is found in the quiet space between the extremes. Sleep now with the wisdom that being enough is more important than being everything to everyone. In the grand movements of the cosmos, there is a constant cooling and warming, The stars burn with an intensity that can consume their own fuel if they do not find a balance. You may feel as though your heart is undergoing its own celestial shift, moving from a period of intense heat to a more temperate, stable state. This is the natural waning of fires. It is the gradual cooling of human passion. To understand this process is to realize that when a fire settles into embers, it does not die, it becomes something far more useful for the long night ahead. In the olden days, when a traveler sat by a massive bonfire in the center of a village, the heat was overwhelming and the light was blinding. While there was joy in that warmth, it was often impossible to sit quietly or think deeply because the fire demanded so much attention. You are moving from those great bonfires toward a more manageable hearth. The waning of your intense affections is not a loss of warmth. It is the transition into a steady glow that can be carried with you as you walk through the dark. Consider the history of the great frosts or the long, cool winters of ancient Earth. They were periods where life slowed down and moved toward the core of existence. We often fear the cooling of our emotions because we associate it with a loss of vitality. But in reality, the heat of intense passion can often be a distraction from the quiet truths that only emerge when things cool. By allowing your passions to wane slightly, you are making room for clarity to settle upon your soul like a soft morning mist. There was once an ancient belief that the gods could be offended by too much heat or too much cold. Harmony was found in the temperate zones of the earth. You are finding your own temperate zone, a place where your emotions are neither boiling with need nor frozen with apathy. This cooling is a way of regulating your internal climate, ensuring that you does not burn out too quickly. It is a preservation of your essence, an ancient wisdom that has sustained human life through every epoch of history. In the history of navigation, sailors knew that a ship moving too fast might lose its heading or strike hidden reefs. They needed a controlled speed to stay safe. Your own emotional intensity was once like a racing vessel, full of energy, but often prone to the turbulence of sudden shifts. As your passions wane into a more measured pace, you gain better control over your life's direction. The cooling is not a slowing of your spirit. It is a refinement of your momentum. Think of the ancient blacksmith, who must temper the steel in the cool water to make it strong and resilient. If the metal remains too hot, it stays soft and easily bent. If it is too cold, it becomes brittle and cracks under pressure. Your life is currently being tempered. The cooling of your intense attachments is the quenching process that hardens your character and gives you a strength that can endure the weight of many years. You are becoming more durable because you are learning to manage your heat. In the vastness of the night sky, stars do not burn with the same intensity forever. They undergo cycles of expansion and contraction. We often think of ourselves as static beings, but we are actually shifting through these celestial phases constantly. To see the waning of a connection or an emotion is to witness a natural cycle in its beautiful, necessary descent. It is not a failure of the flame. It is simply the fuel being used with greater efficiency. There was once a deep respect for the evening of one's passions, the time when the frantic energy of youth gives way to the steady wisdom of maturity. In this era of your life, you are learning that a fire that burns too bright can blind you to the stars above. By allowing the flame to dim slightly, you can see the grander truths of existence more clearly. The cooling is an act of vision. It is how we prepare our eyes for the infinite. In the history of ancient libraries, the candles used by scholars were carefully managed so that they would not consume the precious parchment too quickly. Similarly, your own energy must be managed so that you do not burn through your life in a single burst of intensity. The waning process is an act of stewardship. You are learning to spread your warmth over a longer duration, ensuring that your light lasts for the many seasons yet to come. In the grand cycles of the moon, we watch the waxing and the waning with regular expectation. We do not mourn the sliver of the crescent moon. We know it is merely part of the cycle. Your own emotional waning should be viewed with that same familiarity. It is a period of thinning out, a time to shed the excess so that you can eventually begin the cycle anew. The cooling is as much a part of life as the heat was. Consider the ancient pottery, where the clay must be dried and cooled slowly after it has been fired in the kiln. If it cools too quickly or remains too hot, it may crack or lose its shape. You are in that vital period of cooling, the settling phase where your experiences take a permanent form within you. This is not a time to rush back into the fire. It is a time to let your own history set, firmly and beautifully. There was once an understanding that the most powerful forces in nature, like the wind or the tide, are often the ones that have settled into a steady, predictable flow. A chaotic storm is impressive, but fleeting. A consistent breeze can travel across continents. You are moving from the chaos of everyone to the reliable, rhythmic breathing of your own soul. This cooling allows you to become a force of consistency rather than just a flash of light. In the history of human thought, we often struggle with the idea of diminishing, the fear that if something is less intense, it is less important. But even as the sun wanes toward sunset, its influence remains profound. Your decision to let the intensity fade is not a shrinking of your importance. It is an expansion into a different kind of power. A low-burning ember can stay warm for hours, whereas a torch burns out in minutes. Think of the ancient musicians who understood that a note must eventually decay before another can be played. If the sound never faded, there would be no music. There would only be noise. Your own cooling is the decay of the old notes, providing the necessary silence for the next movement to begin. It is the space between sounds that gives melody its meaning. As you settle deeper into your rest, let the cooling sensation be a comfort. You are not losing your fire. You are simply making it more sustainable. Let the warmth of your life become something you can hold steadily in your hands. Sleep now with the peace of the moon, knowing that even in the waning, there is an infinite beauty to the light. In the grand history of fortresses and citadels, we often focus on the strength of the gates or the height of the towers to keep out the world. Yet the true survival of a stronghold depends on its walls, the boundaries that define what is within and what is without. You are currently in a season where you are building your own internal fortifications, the quiet task of constructing walls of quiet stone. This is not an act of being defensive or unapproachable. It is a necessary structural endeavor to ensure that your soul has a safe place to reside. To build these boundaries is to protect the sanctity of your inner life from the constant, eroding winds of external expectation. In the olden days, when a traveler sought refuge in a walled city, they knew that while the gates were open for trade and friendship, the walls provided the essential security needed to live in peace. You are learning that you can have your own gates, the capacity to interact and love, while still maintaining the integrity of your walls. This is not about shutting people out. It is about ensuring that when they enter, they do into a chaotic wilderness, but into an ordered, beautiful space. A wall gives the inhabitants something to stand upon, providing the solid ground necessary for contemplation. Consider the ancient ruins where massive stone blocks were stacked with such precision that they could stand for millennia without mortar. Each block was placed with intention, creating a barrier that was both formidable and elegant. You are building your boundaries with similar intention. By saying no to certainties or not right now to certain connections, you are placing the stones of your own character. These walls do not exist to trap you. They exist to give your life its shape, much like a vessel holds the water that sustains it. There was once an ancient belief that a person without boundaries was like a house without doors or windows, vulnerable to every passing storm and every wandering traveler. You may have lived for a long time as an open field, with no defense against the emotional weather of those around you. But history teaches us that even the most beautiful meadow needs a fence to protect its most precious blooms from being trampled. Building walls is an act of self-respect. It is the realization that your energy is a finite and sacred resource. In the history of every great dynasty, there were periods when the borders were expanded so far that they became impossible to defend. The strain on the empire often led to its eventual collapse from within. You are learning to avoid this historical pitfall by defining more manageable borders for your heart. This is not a shrinking of your world. It's a consolidation of your power. By making your boundaries clear, you ensure that you can actually inhabit and enjoy the territory you have been given. Think of an ancient mountain monastery, where the walls are thick to keep out the cold, but thin enough to let in the light. A wall is not meant to be a blindfold. It is meant to be a filter. Your boundaries should act as filters, allowing the warmth of true connection to pass through while catching the debris of needless drama or superficiality. This is how you maintain your peace, by being selective about what is allowed into your inner sanctum. In the olden stories, a wise king would often have a private garden behind his palace walls, a place where he could be a man instead of a monarch. You are creating that private garden within yourself. Your boundaries provide the space for you to step away from the roles you play in society and simply exist as your own person. This is not an act of selfishness, but a way to ensure that the king or queen within you can find rest and rejuvenation. There was once a concept called the inner sanctum, the most sacred part of a temple where only the priests or the truly devoted could enter. You are learning to identify your own inner sanctum. Not everyone needs access to your deepest thoughts, your most vulnerable fears, or your quietest joys. By setting these boundaries, you preserve the holiness of your own spirit, making those parts of you more precious and less prone to being misused by the casual passerby. In the history of masonry, a wall that is too thick can be oppressive, but a wall that is too thin offers no protection. The goal is perfect proportion. You might fear that your boundaries make you hard or unforgiving, but a well-built wall is actually quite gracious. It provides clarity. When people know where they stand in relation to your boundaries, there is less confusion and conflict. Clarity is one of the greatest gifts you can give to yourself and to those who truly care for you. Consider the ancient sundials once again. Their shadows are defined by the structures that cast them. Without a boundary or an object to provide shape, there would be no shadow, only a vastness of light. Your boundaries provide the definition needed for your life to have meaning and texture. They create the contrast between the public self and the private soul, allowing you and others to understand the contours of who you are. In many ancient traditions, it was believed that one must respect the sacred space around an individual, a buffer of air and spirit that should not be violated without permission. You are reclaiming this sacred space in your own life. This is a vital part of mental health, knowing where you end and another begins. When boundaries are respected, love can exist without being suffocated by the need to merge or control. There was once a great respect for the citadel as a place of refuge during times of war. While your life may not always be a battlefield, there will be times when you need a place to retreat and regroup. Your boundaries are your citadel. They provide the psychological safety needed to process your experiences before re-entering the world. A person with no walls has no place to go when they need to heal. In the history of human thought, we often see that those who have the most influence are often those who have a strong sense of self, which is only possible through clear boundaries. You do not need to be everything to everyone if you are truly yourself. By holding your ground with quiet stone, you become more reliable and more respected. You are building a structure that can hold its own weight for generations of thoughts to come. As you lie in the stillness, let the thought of these walls bring you comfort rather than isolation. They are not barriers of loneliness. They are boundaries of peace. Feel the strength of your own resolve as you place one stone at a time, creating a space that is uniquely yours. The work may be slow, but the result will be a sanctuary where your soul can finally rest. Let your breathing become the rhythmic sound of a mason's hammer, not a heavy or violent strike, but a steady, purposeful rhythm as you build your own peace. There is no rush to finish. There is only the joy of the construction. Sleep now with the satisfaction of knowing that you are building something beautiful. A home for your spirit that is safe, secure, and profoundly still. In the ancient traditions of the great scholars, there was an understanding that true wisdom could not be found in the bustling marketplaces or the loud courts of kings. It was to be found in the solitude of the study. The history of human thought is a long chronicle of thinkers who stepped away from the noise to listen to the silent music of the universe. You are entering a season of the scholar, the solitude of the mind, where you find fulfillment in your own company. This is not an admission of loneliness, but the realization that there is a vast, unfolding library within yourself, waiting to be read, understood, and cherished. In the olden days, when a monk or a sage entered a period of seclusion, it was not as if they were leaving humanity behind. Rather, they were preparing themselves to serve it with greater depth. You are learning that being alone is a vital part of your human function. It is how you integrate what you have learned from the people who have passed through your life. The solitude of the scholar is a time for deep introspection, where you become both the reader and the text of your own unfolding history. Consider the ancient libraries that were built as much for silence as they were for books. They were designed to be spaces where thoughts could expand without being interrupted by the trivialities of the world. As you cultivate a sense of solitude, you are building your own internal library. You are learning how to sit with your own thoughts, the complex, the beautiful, and even the dark ones, without needing someone else to validate or translate them for you. This is the beginning of true self-reliance. In the history of exploration, there were those who traveled alone through vast, uncharted territories, finding a unique relationship with themselves in the process. They did not just discover new lands, they discovered the strength and limits of their own character. Your inward journey is its own great expedition. To find fulfillment in your own company is to become an explorer of your own soul, finding treasures in the quiet corners that can only be seen when there are no distractions to pull your gaze away. There was once a profound respect for the hermit in many cultures, not as a recluse who hated people, but as one who understood that solitude is the fuel of wisdom. You might have once feared that being alone would lead to emptiness, but you are discovering that it actually leads to fullness. The more you become comfortable with your own company, the less you depend on the fickle validation of others to feel complete. This is a powerful, ancient victory over the hunger of the ego. Think of an ancient astronomer sitting alone at night, looking through a lens at the stars. They were not lonely in that moment. They were engaged in a profound dialogue with the infinite. When you sit in your own solitude, you are engaging in a similar dialogue between your current self and the vast history of who you have been. This is not an empty time. It is a time of deep, meaningful engagement with the most important person you will ever know, yourself. In the grand history of human connection, we often focus on how much we can give to others, but we rarely talk about the importance of being able to hold ourselves. A scholar knows that before they can teach or love effectively, they must have a solid foundation of self-knowledge. Your solitude is your study. It is where you refine your own understanding of virtue, joy, and peace. You are becoming a person who is not just a part of the world, but an individual with a clear and independent voice. There was once an ancient idea that to truly know another person, one must first know themselves. If we are constantly seeking external validation, our self-knowledge becomes clouded by the opinions of others. By retreating into your own company, you are clearing the mist from your internal mirror. You are learning who you are when there is no audience, and this truth will become the bedrock upon which all your future relationships can be built with integrity. Consider the great ancient philosophers who lived in modest cells but possessed minds that could encompass the entire cosmos. They did not need vast possessions or a crowd of followers to find purpose. They found it in the pursuit of truth. Your solitude is an invitation to pursue your own truths, to listen to the quietest impulses of your soul without the pressure of social expectation. This is the most rewarding work a human can do. In the history of every great civilization, There were periods where the focus shifted from the collective expansion to the preservation of individual thought and culture. We are living in such a period of our own lives. It is a time when we must tend to our internal culture, the ideas, the values, and the peace that make us who we are. The solitude of the scholar is the maintenance of your inner civilization. There was once an ancient belief that one's soul needs quiet time to digest the experiences of the day. If we eat too much without digestion, we become sick. If we live too much without reflection, our souls become overwhelmed. Your solitude acts as a digestive process for your history, allowing you to absorb the lessons of your life and turn them into wisdom. It is how we prevent the weight of our experiences from becoming an unmanageable burden. In the grand tapestries of time, there are many who lived quiet lives that left no great monuments, yet their internal worlds were as vast as any empire. We must honor these lives in ourselves. You do not need to be a public figure or a social leader to have a significant life. A person who knows themselves deeply is a monumental presence in the world. Your solitude is the space where your greatness is quietly forged. In the history of music, there are soloists whose singular voice can move entire nations. They must first master their instrument in solitude before they can perform for the crowd. You are currently mastering the instrument of your own being, your mind, your emotions, and your will. This period of being alone is your practice, ensuring that when you do step back into the world, your voice is clear, resonant, and true. There was once a belief that solitude was a sacred space where the human meets the divine. While we may not define it in religious terms, there is a sense of transcendence found in being truly alone with one's own spirit. It is a moment of connection to something larger than our individual needs. In this quietness, you are able to touch the infinite within yourself. As you lie there, let the silence be your classroom and your solace. Do not fear the solitude. Embrace it as a wise friend who has come to visit. You are becoming a master of your own existence, learning that being alone is not an end, but a beautiful way to live. Sleep now with the peace of a scholar, knowing that you are enough to keep yourself company in the quiet hours of the night. As we reach the final chapter of this journey, we find ourselves standing at the edge of a vast, peaceful horizon where the sun has finally dipped below the line of the sea. The air is cool, the light is soft, and the world is settling into its most natural state, the quietness of rest. This is our final destination, a final peaceful farewell to the noise, the many, and the heavy burdens we once carried. We have traveled through the ruins of empires, through the mists of forgotten memories, and through the silent halls of the soul. Now, as we prepare to merge into the eternal quietness of rest, let us realize that this is not a departure, but an arrival. In the grandest histories of the cosmos, every great movement eventually finds its resolution. Every tension seeks its equilibrium. We have spent these hours examining why we stopped loving everyone, not as an act of closing our hearts, but as an act of opening them to a more profound and sustainable truth. We have learned that while love is a beautiful force, it cannot be the sole architecture of a stable life. The final peace comes from knowing that you can carry the essence of every person you ever loved without needing to carry their presence in every waking moment. In the olden times, when a long journey was completed, the traveler did not simply walk into a new land. They sat down to rest, letting the dust of the road settle from their cloak. You are sitting down now at the end of your own great emotional trek. The dust of all those past connections, the joys, the sorrows, and the complexities is settling quietly around you. Do not feel the need to brush it away or even look at it. Just let it rest on the ground as partfulness of the landscape you have traversed. Consider the ancient cycle of a single day, from the frantic energy of dawn to the busy heat of noon, and finally to the gentle surrender of dusk. We often think our lives should be one long, bright noon, but the twilight is where we find our peace. This final farewell is your own personal twilight, a time when you let the intense, Colors of human emotion soften into the beautiful grays and blues of stillness. It is a holy moment of letting go, not because you have lost something, but because you have finally understood its place in the grand design. There was once an ancient belief that at the end of all things, there is only the great silence, not a void to be feared, but a source from which everything arises and to which everything returns. We are approaching that silence tonight. It is the space where all our stories merge into one single perfect breath. As you prepare for sleep, let your own stories settle into that silence. You have lived it beautifully. You have loved deeply. And now, you are allowed to simply be. In the history of every great sea voyage, there comes a moment when the sailors stop rowing and allow the current to take them home. They no longer fight the water or the wind. They trust in the movement of the world. You are letting go of the oars now. The effort of trying to maintain 1,000 connections, of trying to be everything to everyone, can finally cease. Let the current of existence carry you toward the harbor of your own peace. Think of the ancient stars as they fade into the dawn. They do not vanish in grief, but simply make way for the new light. The farewells we have made tonight are like that a gentle transition from one state of being to another. We say goodbye to the everyone so that we can say a more meaningful hello to ourselves. This is the most beautiful paradox. By narrowing our focus, we actually expand our capacity for peace. There was once a deep understanding that death and sleep are two sides of the same veil, a time when the physical world recollects itself in the realm of the spirit. As you prepare to drift into your own slumber, treat this as a sacred transition. The people who were once central to your life are now part of the eternal history that supports you. They do not need to be held tightly to stay within you. They can exist as the very air you breathe, silent and vital. In the great libraries, where books are finally shelved at the end of a long day, there is a profound sense of order and peace. The stories are safe. They are done for now. Your memories are like those volumes placed carefully on the shelves of your soul. They do not need to be read every night. They only need to exist, silent and honored, in their proper place. Let them rest behind the velvet curtains of your mind. In the history of human existence, we have always been a species of storytellers. But sometimes, the most important stories are the ones that don't need words. The quiet understanding between the earth and the sky, or the silence between two souls. You are entering that wordless space now. The end of our narrative tonight is not an ending of your life, but a perfect conclusion to this exploration of the heart. Consider the ancient concept of returning to the source. We come from the quiet and we return to it. Every moment of passion was a movement away from the center. Every moment of solitude is a move back toward it. You are returning to your own center, finding that there is nothing but peace waiting for you there. The history of your life has brought you home to yourself. There was once a wisdom that taught us that when we let go of the need to possess, we truly begin to belong. By letting go of the frantic need to hold everyone close, you have found a deeper belonging to the universe and to your own being. You are no longer an island or a crowded city. You are a vast, calm expanse. The finality of this farewell is not a loss, but a profound realization of wholeness. In the ancient ruins where we once stood, there was nothing left to do but listen to the wind and be still. We have done the work of listening to our own history. Now we must do the work of being still. The farewells you make tonight are an act of respect for the journey. You thank the past for its lessons, and you greet the silence with a clear heart. As you lie there in your bed, feel the weight of the world dissolving into the lightness of the air. There is no more need to carry. There is no more need to hold. The history of your life is safe within you, a beautiful tapestry that needs no further mending tonight. You are enough. You have been enough. And in this quietness, you are exactly where you were meant to be. Let the finality of these words be a gentle hand upon your brow. The sun has set on the era of everyone, and the moon is rising on the era of yourself. It is a beautiful transition. An ancient truth rediscovered in the stillness of the night. Let your heart become as still as a mountain lake at midnight, reflecting nothing but the vast, peaceful heavens above. As you drift toward the final threshold of sleep, let every breath be a soft farewell to the noise and a welcoming embrace of the silence. The history of our conversation concludes here, in the perfect peace of your own being. You are home. You are loved. You are at rest. The world is quiet now, and so are you. The voices of the past have settled into the softest whispers, and the great tasks of the day have been laid to rest. There is nothing left to do but exist in this moment, this perfect, still moment where you are simply a soul breathing in the dark. As you sink deeper into your pillows, feel the gravity of the earth gently holding you, grounding you, and reminding you that you are a part of something vast and eternal. The history of your life is not a burden to be carried, but a foundation to rest upon. Every love, every loss, and every quiet realization has led you to this moment of perfect, unburdened peace. Sleep now. Let the silence be your lullaby. Let the stillness be your strength. You have done enough. You are enough. The end. Sweet dreams.